high-level panel with our distinguished guests. Well, I mean, we heard a number of very inspiring interventions earlier this morning. I mean, our discussion and the proceedings of the Assembly of the State Parties come at a very a crucial time. Actually, I mean, we are about, the international community is about to launch the negotiation of the post-2015 agenda, which will lead us next September to the adoption by a summit of the United Nations. So it will be a process that will start, that will last for about 9 months, but above all, the agenda 2015 will accompany us for the strategies of international development for the next 15 years, up to 2030, which with an overarching goal, i.e. the eradication of poverty, of extreme poverty by 2030. So we heard already from the intervention of Irene Khan.
The room is half empty. Is it a point? Is there a point? Why did I come here?
Yeah. So
I mean,
that's maybe somebody.
Yeah.
So I mean, we heard from Irene Khan in her intervention how this relationship between poverty and the rule of law is fundamental. Now, at this one basic concept, I mean, at the very core of the agenda, the post-2015 agenda, will be, I mean, people at the center of the strategies of sustainable development. We heard also that rule of law means access.
How did they organize
access to justice, affordable, accessible, and transparent, as Irene Khan put it. We heard about a few central pieces of this debate. I mean, how the rule of law is essential for ensuring women's empowerment and for the protection of basic rights, including rights that are at the very core of any process of economic development. Let's think, for example, of land's rights. Now, we are dealing with a concept, basically, of access to substantive justice, but we are also dealing with a concept of sustainability and predictability of the law. Now we have an agenda, which ought to be ambitious, transformative and universal, among others. Universal will mean, I mean, that rights and obligations will fall on each and every member state of the United Nations. So it will not simply be the agenda for development of the developing countries. There will be universal obligations. So we have a unique opportunity with these distinguished panelists to ask them a few fundamental questions. To the representative of governments first, how will governments commit themselves to ensure the effectiveness and the accessibility to justice systems? We heard a very detailed account this morning from Her Excellency Neila Chaabane Amuda, but I think, I mean, I will ask her in particular when it comes to her about this point. I mean, how can government commit to this basic point, ensuring the effectiveness and accessibility of justice system? We have a fundamental role, of course, of the judiciary systems and of the organs within the constitutional bodies and the justice systems that have a key role. Let's think of constitutional courts And here we have the unique opportunity of having the presence among us of a distinguished panelist, Dr. Oscar Urviola Hani, President of the Constitutional Court of Peru. And I will ask in particular, how can the judiciary and the Constitutional Court act as guarantors of human rights and rule of law? And I will also ask to another distinguished panelist, Dr. Hassane Cisse, from the perspective of the international financial institutions about I will ask to provide an insight for us into the relationship between the rule of law and economic growth. But first I suggest to give the floor to His Excellency Hans Correll, as we have the unique opportunity of having his insight and his experience, of course, from a long history and a long record of functions first in the judiciary system in his own country, Sweden, but especially as former Undersecretary General for Legal Affairs and the Legal Counsel of the United Nations, and also as a former ambassador. Mr. Correll, how do you see, these fundamental challenge, but also the unique opportunity of the new agenda for development as a framework for ensuring a high place on the agenda of the international community on the themes of the rule of law and on the relationship between the rule of law, governance, and the processes of economic growth and the strategies of economic and sustainable development? Mr. Correll, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Aren't we missing one member of the panel, Peter Oganga Mangiti? Should not he be on the panel as well? Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Irenkam, for inviting me to this occasion. And it's really very, very interesting for me to come. Every nameplate that I see in the room gives me an association, an event, something I've done, or personalities, or in some cases, all the three at the same time. And therefore, I'm privileged to address you today. And I do this through the prism of a former civil servant. I'm a former ambassador of Sweden. This is why I'm speaking in my personal capacity only. And I'm speaking also through the prism of a very fortunate career that I have been allowed to pursue. First of all, in the judiciary of my country, 10 years on the bench, including in particular dealing with real estate law, making the idea of how you register titles to land something that is my backbone. And I realized that in many countries you can't do that. If you can't do that, you cannot have a proper system in the country. I then joined the Ministry of Justice to do legislative work, including one task to draft the Secrecy Act of my country. There is not a nook and cranny where I and my three colleagues who drafted the law have not been in to have a look at it. And after that exercise, we were a very humble crowd, that a country can be so complex, that there are so many experts that are involved in so many things. And then later I came to the Foreign Office, where I was ambassador and head of the legal department in the office, including with negotiations, particularly during the Cold War, in many sensitive issues, including also maritime delimitation, which is a very important element to many countries present here today. And then, of course, I ended up as the Legal Counsel of the United Nations during a period when the atmosphere in the organization was quite positive. During that period, the Law of the Sea Convention entered into force, one of the most powerful international legal instruments you can think of, including contribution to peace and security in the world. In those years, we established the Yugoslav, the Rwanda tribunals, also the Rome Conference. On the 18th of July, I was sitting at Campidoglio with Kofi Annan as his representative to watch the states sign the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. And then also establishing all the other institutions, the Sierra Leone Special Court and the special chambers in Cambodia, and also the 3 institutions on the Law of the Sea Convention, the Law of the Sea Tribunal in Hamburg, the Seabed Authority in Kingston, Jamaica, and the Continental Shelf Commission. These are elements on the international arena that are tremendously important in contributing to the rule of law at the international level. Now, looking at conflicts, the reasons for conflicts are the same in a sense. And if you look at the world today, you have the same challenge here in warlords and dictators and so forth. But there are so many other elements that are the threat. And when you look at them, why is there a conflict? And you go to the root causes, the answer is the same. No democracy, no rule of law. That's a recipe for a conflict in the world. The present situation, we have conflicts in Africa and the Middle East, ISIS, Iraq, and Ukraine. And with respect to Ukraine, in my view, this is unforgivable. That situation could have been solved in another manner. And here we have a permanent member of the Security Council clearly violating not only international law, the UN Charter, but also the Helsinki process, where when the Berlin Wall came down, 2 items came on top of the agenda: protection of minorities, and no borders in Europe are changed unless after agreement. And here, look at Ukraine, what happened. Now, in peace and security, there are also other elements, and I would like to focus specifically on those today, because these are the real challenges when we leave this 19th century mentality that you see in some quarters. Those challenges are the population of the world. We were hardly 2 billion people when the United Nations were founded back in 1945. Today we are 7 billion, and in 2050 we will be 9.6 billion people on the globe. A tremendous challenge to the world. Also, you have poverty, which may raise sort of tensions among peoples around the world. And you have the climate change and the sort of things that we should be looking at. And I'm particularly focusing on the permanent 5 members of the Security Council. This is where they should focus their attention. And we had a meeting in Syracuse and in Sicily in early September when we engaged in these matters, and the result of this is available on the web. And I, Chef Bassioni and Martin Lees, wrote a letter to the Security Council asking them to set up a working group to study these elements, because these will be the real threats to peace and security and to the rule of law in the future. I will say that to address the rule of law, it's very interesting to note what Ambassador Lane says in his invitation to this Congress. This is what he says: "We realize that we cannot fight poverty, combat disease, or preserve the environment without proper rule of law. It is a cross-cutting issue that must be promoted and improved through the world." And this is precisely what it is all about. And I would suggest, because I had the privilege when I was a student to be a sailor,